Sometimes the smallest act of kindness reveals the biggest poverty of all. Nathan Blackwell laughed. Not loudly. Not enough for the entire restaurant to turn around. Just a quiet, amused chuckle behind a crystal glass of sparkling water. The kind of laugh a man makes when he believes he has just witnessed something foolish. Outside, a cold November rain tapped gently against the windows of Willow Creek Grill, a family-owned restaurant 40 miles north of Boston. Inside, warm amber lights reflected across polished wood tables and framed photographs that had hung on the walls for decades. The dinner rush was beginning to fade. Conversations softened. Plates clinked. Coffee steamed. And near the register, a young waitress named Claire Bennett quietly placed a folded $5 bill beneath a receipt. Nathan noticed it immediately. He noticed everything. People didn't build fortunes by missing details. At 42 years old, Nathan had transformed a struggling software startup into a company worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He measured efficiency, calculated value, analyzed outcomes. To him, numbers told the truth. And the number he had just seen made absolutely no sense. $5. That was it. $5 and a small folded note left beside the bill. Claire slipped them into the hand of an elderly waitress who had just finished her shift. The older woman looked exhausted. Her silver hair was tied back neatly, and her uniform sleeves were rolled above tired wrists. Claire gave her a gentle smile before returning toward the kitchen. Nathan shook his head. $5, he muttered. Across the booth sat his 10-year-old son, Oliver, quietly finishing a grilled cheese sandwich. What? Oliver asked. Nathan leaned back against the leather seat and glanced toward Claire. Nothing. Just funny. Oliver followed his gaze. Claire was refilling coffee cups at another table, moving with calm confidence. She never seemed rushed, never seemed stressed, even during the busiest moments. What's funny? Oliver asked again. Nathan pointed subtly toward the older waitress. That girl gave her a $5 tip. Oliver blinked. Okay. Nathan smiled. That's not helping anybody. The boy looked confused. Why not? Nathan lifted an eyebrow. Because $5 doesn't change anything. He reached for the check resting on the table. The total was $68.30. Nathan had spent more than $5 on bottled water that afternoon. More than $5 on parking. More than $5 every few minutes simply by existing in the world he had built. If you're going to help someone, he continued, actually help them. Oliver stared at the tabletop. Maybe she did. Nathan smiled again. Trust me, $5 doesn't change a person's life. At that exact moment, something happened. The elderly waitress unfolded the note. She read it once. Then again. Her hand moved slowly toward her mouth. Her shoulders trembled. And before anyone could notice, she wiped away a tear. Nathan's smile faded slightly. The restaurant remained wrapped in its usual evening sounds. Dishes, silverware, quiet laughter. But for a brief second, something felt different. Something he couldn't quite explain. Across the room, Claire never stopped working. She never looked back to see the reaction. She never waited for gratitude. She simply picked up a coffee pot and continued serving strangers as if nothing at all had happened. Nathan watched the older woman stare at the note for several long seconds. Then he looked down at his son. Oliver was still watching her too. Neither of them spoke. But for the first time that evening, Nathan found himself wondering what could possibly be written on a piece of paper worth only $5, and yet somehow enough to make someone cry. Oliver continued staring across the restaurant long after the elderly waitress folded the note and slipped it carefully into her apron pocket. There was something unusual about the way she held it, as though it weighed far more than a simple piece of paper. Nathan noticed it too, although he quickly dismissed the feeling growing in the back of his mind. Feelings were unreliable. Facts mattered. Numbers mattered. Results mattered. Across the room, Claire Bennett moved between tables carrying a tray of coffee mugs. Her blonde hair was pulled neatly behind her shoulders. Her uniform was simple. Nothing about her appearance suggested she was remarkable. And yet, without realizing it, half the room seemed calmer whenever she approached. A tired truck driver smiled when she refilled his coffee. A young mother stopped looking overwhelmed after Claire brought crayons for her daughter. An elderly couple thanked her by name as they prepared to leave. Small moments. Easy to ignore. Nathan had spent most of his life ignoring small moments. Dad, Oliver said quietly. Do you think she knows everybody here? Nathan glanced toward Claire. Probably not. Then why does everybody smile when she talks to them? Nathan looked down at the check again. That is her job. Oliver accepted the answer, but his expression suggested he was unconvinced. Near the register, the elderly waitress was preparing to leave. Claire approached her one last time. The two women exchanged a few words that Nathan could not hear. Then something unexpected happened. The older woman reached forward and hugged Claire. Not a quick, polite hug. A real one. The kind people give when words are not enough. Claire smiled softly and squeezed her hand before returning to work. Nathan found himself watching longer than he intended. You are staring, Oliver said. Nathan looked away immediately. No, I am not. Oliver grinned. You are. Before Nathan could respond, their waitress arrived carrying a fresh cup of coffee. Claire placed it gently on the table. Anything else I can get for you tonight? She asked. Her voice was calm, warm, professional. Nathan looked up at her. For the first time, he noticed faint shadows beneath her eyes. Signs of exhaustion. Signs of someone who had probably been working since early morning. Yet somehow she still treated every customer as if they mattered. No, Nathan replied. We are fine. Claire nodded. Thank you for coming in tonight. She turned to leave. Then Oliver spoke. Excuse me. Claire stopped and smiled. Yes. Oliver pointed toward the front of the restaurant. Why was that lady crying? For a brief second, Claire seemed surprised. Then she followed his gaze. Understanding softened her expression. Sometimes people cry because they are sad, she said gently. And sometimes people cry because they finally feel seen. Oliver thought about that. What does that mean? Claire glanced toward the rain-covered windows. The world outside looked dark and cold. It means somebody reminds them they matter. Then she offered a small smile and returned to her work. Nathan watched her walk away. The answer sounded simple. Too simple. Yet somehow it stayed with him. Outside, the rain continued tapping against the glass. Inside, Nathan Blackwell sat perfectly still, staring into his untouched coffee, as if it contained a question money had never taught him how to answer. Nathan drove home through the rain with one hand resting on the steering wheel and the other draped across the center console. The windshield wipers moved back and forth in a steady rhythm. Streetlights reflected across the wet pavement like ribbons of gold. Beside him, Oliver sat quietly in the passenger seat, looking out the window. Usually, the drive home was filled with questions. Questions about school. Questions about sports. Questions about whatever book Oliver happened to be reading that week. Tonight felt different. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was thoughtful. At a red light, Nathan glanced toward his son. You are unusually quiet. Oliver shrugged. I am thinking. Nathan almost smiled. About what? The boy looked out at the rain again. The lady at the restaurant. Nathan knew immediately which one. Claire. Oliver nodded. She seemed nice. She did. Nathan waited a moment. Is that what you were thinking about? Oliver hesitated. Not exactly. The traffic light changed. The car rolled forward. Then what? Oliver lowered his gaze. I am thinking about what she said. Nathan tightened his grip on the steering wheel. He knew exactly which words his son meant. Sometimes people cry because they finally feel seen. The sentence had followed him all the way to the parking lot. All the way into the car. All the way onto the highway. Do people really forget they matter? Oliver asked quietly. Nathan opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. The question sounded simple. Yet the longer he considered it, the less certain he became. Sometimes, he finally said, I guess they do. Oliver nodded slowly. The conversation faded, but the feeling remained. Later that evening, after Oliver had gone upstairs, Nathan stood alone in the kitchen of his 5,000-square-foot home. Stainless steel appliances gleamed beneath recessed lighting. Everything was immaculate. Everything was expensive. Everything was exactly as it should be. Yet the house felt strangely empty. He poured himself a glass of water and stared through the large windows overlooking the backyard. In the distance, rain still fell across the dark lawn. His phone vibrated on the marble countertop. A message from his chief operating officer. Quarterly projections. Revenue forecasts. Numbers that normally captured his full attention. Tonight he barely glanced at them. Instead, his thoughts drifted back to Willow Creek Grill. Back to the elderly waitress holding a folded note with trembling hands. Back to Claire Bennett walking away without waiting for recognition. Nathan frowned. He had spent years donating money to charities, funding scholarships, writing checks with more zeros than most people would earn in a decade. Yet he could not remember a single recipient crying because they felt seen. The realization unsettled him. He picked up his phone again. Without fully understanding why, he opened the browser and searched for Willow Creek Grill. The restaurant appeared instantly. Small, local, unremarkable. Then he noticed something. Hundreds of reviews. Most praised the food. Many praised the atmosphere. But one name appeared again and again. Claire. Nathan scrolled through comment after comment. She remembered my father's birthday. She stayed late to help my mother. She treated us like family. She made a difficult day easier. Nathan stared at the screen. None of the reviews mentioned money. None mentioned tips. None mentioned anything extraordinary. Just kindness. Quiet, consistent kindness. And for reasons he could not explain, that troubled him more than any business problem he had faced all year. The next morning arrived clear and cold. Sunlight spilled across the glass towers of downtown Boston, while Nathan Blackwell sat through a quarterly strategy meeting on the 32nd floor of Blackwell Technologies. A dozen executives surrounded the conference table. Charts glowed on massive screens. Revenue growth, market expansion, investor forecasts, the language of success. Normally Nathan would have been leading every discussion, challenging every assumption, spotting every weakness. Today he found himself distracted. Nathan, the voice belonged to his chief operating officer. What are your thoughts? Nathan blinked and looked up. Every face in the room was turned toward him. Sorry. Repeat that. The executives exchanged brief glances. The request was unusual. Nathan almost never missed details. The meeting continued, but his concentration never fully returned. During a break, he walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Thousands of people moved below like streams of flowing light and color, each carrying invisible burdens, invisible stories, invisible victories. The thought appeared suddenly. How many of them felt unseen? Nathan frowned. The question sounded ridiculous, yet it lingered. Around noon, he left the office earlier than usual. He told himself he had a free hour before his next appointment. He told himself he simply wanted lunch. He told himself several things. None of them felt entirely true. 45 minutes later, his black sedan pulled into the parking lot of Willow Creek Grill. The restaurant looked exactly as it had the night before. Simple, familiar, unimpressive. Nathan stepped inside. The scent of coffee and fresh bread greeted him immediately. A bell chimed above the entrance. Claire Bennett was arranging menus near the host's stand when she looked up. For a brief moment, surprise crossed her face. Then her usual calm smile returned. Good afternoon. Nathan nodded. Afternoon. Table for one. Yes. She led him toward a booth near the windows. The same windows where rain had tapped against the glass the night before. Today's sunlight painted warm patterns across the wooden floor. Nathan sat down. Claire handed him a menu. Can I start you with coffee? Please. A few minutes later she returned carrying a steaming mug. Anything else? Nathan looked at her. Actually, yes. Claire waited patiently. What was in the note? Her expression changed slightly. Not defensive, not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The note. The one you gave the older waitress. Claire glanced toward the counter. Margaret. Nathan nodded. What did it say? Claire looked down at the coffee mug for a moment. Why do you want to know? The question caught him off guard. People usually answered his questions. They did not return them. Nathan considered several responses. Curiosity. Interest. Research. None sounded honest. Finally, he said, because I cannot stop thinking about it. Claire studied him quietly. Then she smiled. Not because she found the answer impressive. Because she believed it was sincere. It said something very simple, she replied. What? Claire folded her hands lightly in front of her. It said thank you for noticing everyone else when nobody notices you. Nathan sat motionless. The words landed harder than he expected. Not because they were clever. Not because they were dramatic. Because they felt true. Across the restaurant, customers laughed. Dishes clinked. Coffee brewed. Life moved forward exactly as it always had. Yet for the second day in a row, Nathan Blackwell found himself staring at something that could not be measured, purchased, or calculated. And for the second day in a row, he had no idea what to do with it. Nathan remained at the booth long after Claire returned to her other tables. His coffee had grown cold. He barely noticed. The sentence echoed through his mind with surprising force. Thank you for noticing everyone else when nobody notices you. It was such a small observation. Yet it revealed something he had completely missed. He looked across the restaurant and found Margaret near the counter organizing receipts. She moved carefully, her shoulders slightly bent with age. Customers walked past her without a second glance. Employees rushed around her carrying trays and taking orders. Nobody appeared unkind. Nobody appeared rude. But almost nobody seemed to actually see her. Nathan thought about the hundreds of employees working inside his company. Engineers, designers, account managers, receptionists, custodians. Thousands of people helping build the success attached to his name. How many of them felt invisible? The question followed him as he paid for lunch and walked outside. The afternoon air was crisp. Fallen leaves drifted across the parking lot. Nathan slid into his car, but did not start the engine immediately. Instead, he opened his phone and stared at a list of upcoming meetings. Investor calls, partnership negotiations, executive reviews. His schedule was packed from morning until night. Yet for the first time in years, none of it felt particularly urgent. Back at headquarters, the lobby buzzed with activity. Employees moved quickly between elevators. Phones rang. Conversations overlapped. The company functioned like a perfectly tuned machine. Nathan stepped through the revolving doors and headed toward the executive elevators. Halfway across the lobby, he stopped. Near the entrance stood an older janitor pushing a cleaning cart. Nathan recognized him vaguely. He had probably passed him hundreds of times. The man looked up in surprise when Nathan approached. "Good afternoon," Nathan said. The janitor blinked. "Good afternoon, sir." Nathan glanced at the name badge. "Frank, right?" For a moment, Frank simply stared. "Yes, sir." Nathan smiled politely. "Thank you for keeping this place running." The older man looked genuinely confused. Then something softened in his expression. "You are welcome, sir." It lasted less than 10 seconds. Nothing remarkable. Nothing dramatic. Yet as Nathan walked away, he noticed Frank smiling to himself. The sight unsettled him more than he expected. Later that evening, Oliver sat at the kitchen island working on homework while Nathan reviewed documents nearby. "Can I ask you something?" Oliver said. Nathan lowered the report in his hands. "Of course." Oliver tapped his pencil against the notebook. "Do rich people ever stop wanting more money?" Nathan laughed quietly. "Sometimes." "Did you?" The question landed harder than the boy intended. Nathan looked around the enormous kitchen. The expensive appliances. The custom cabinets. The polished stone countertops. Everything he had once dreamed of owning. Then he thought about Claire. About Margaret. About Frank. "I am not sure," he admitted. Oliver nodded as if the answer made perfect sense. Then he returned to his homework. Nathan sat silently for a long moment. Outside, the sun disappeared below the trees. Inside, a different realization began taking shape. For years he had measured success by what he accumulated. But lately, he could not stop noticing the people who seemed to measure success by what they gave away. The following Saturday, Oliver asked a question that changed the course of the entire week. They were eating breakfast at a small diner near a soccer field after one of his games. The restaurant was crowded with families. Parents balanced coffee cups while children laughed over pancakes. Nathan was checking emails between bites of toast when Oliver suddenly looked up from his orange juice. "Dad." "Yes." "How do you know if somebody is successful?" Nathan smiled automatically. For most of his life, he would have answered without hesitation. Revenue, growth, achievement, influence. The words came easily because he had built his entire world around them. But now he paused. "Why are you asking?" Oliver shrugged. "My teacher said success means different things to different people." Nathan set his phone face down on the table. "That is probably true." Oliver thought for a moment. "Then what does it mean to you?" The question lingered between them. Around them, dishes clinked. A waitress carried a tray of coffees past their booth. Sunlight streamed through the windows. Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it again, because he was no longer certain. A week earlier, he would have talked about business milestones and financial goals. Today, those answers felt incomplete. "I am still figuring that out," he admitted. Oliver seemed surprised. "Really?" Nathan laughed softly. "Really?" The boy nodded thoughtfully and returned to his breakfast. But Nathan could not shake the conversation. Later that afternoon, he found himself driving back toward Willow Creek Grill again. Not because he planned to eat there. Not because he needed anything. Yet somehow his car ended up in the same parking lot for the third time in 8 days. Inside, the restaurant buzzed with weekend energy. Families filled the booths. The smell of fresh pie drifted from the kitchen. Claire was helping an elderly customer settle into a seat near the window. She adjusted the chair carefully, made sure the woman was comfortable, then brought her a glass of water before taking any orders. It was a small gesture, so small that most people would never notice it. Nathan noticed it immediately. He took a seat near the back and simply watched. Over the next hour, he saw the same pattern repeat itself again and again. Claire remembered names, remembered favorite meals, remembered birthdays, remembered details that most people forgot. She treated each person as though they mattered, not because she expected anything in return, because she genuinely believed they did. Nathan realized something uncomfortable. In all his years of building companies, he had become exceptionally good at understanding markets, investors, customers, competition. Yet somewhere along the way, he had stopped paying attention to people as individuals. He saw categories, departments, metrics, performance reviews. Claire saw human beings. The difference felt enormous. As he prepared to leave, he noticed a young employee accidentally drop a stack of menus near the host's stand. Papers scattered across the floor. Before the employee could react, Claire knelt beside her and helped gather every last menu. No frustration, no criticism, just quiet assistance. The young woman smiled with visible relief. Nathan stood frozen near the door. He suddenly understood why customers remembered Claire, why reviews mentioned her name, why Margaret had cried. Kindness was not something Claire performed once in a while. It was something she practiced every day. And for the first time, Nathan wondered whether success had less to do with what a person built and more to do with the lives they quietly touched along the way. Monday morning began with a surprise. Nathan arrived at Blackwell Technologies before sunrise, carrying a cup of coffee and a question that had followed him all weekend. The lobby was quiet. Elevators hummed softly. Computer screens flickered awake across empty offices. Normally, Nathan enjoyed these early hours because they gave him control. Today, he wanted perspective. Instead of heading directly to the executive floor, he stopped at the Human Resources Department. The request he made stunned everyone. "I want to meet employees from every level of the company," he said. "Not department heads, not managers, everyone." By noon, conversations had begun. A receptionist who had worked there for 12 years. A maintenance technician who arrived before dawn every day. A customer service representative balancing work and night classes. Nathan listened, really listened. At first, employees seemed nervous. Most assumed there was a hidden purpose behind the meetings. But as the hours passed, stories emerged. One employee described caring for an aging parent. Another talked about raising 3 children alone. Another spoke about dreams of starting a small business one day. Nathan noticed something unexpected. The more people shared, the less he remembered their job titles. He remembered their names instead. That evening, he picked Oliver up from school. The boy climbed into the car carrying a science project and an oversized backpack. "How was your day?" Nathan asked. "Pretty good." Oliver buckled his seatbelt. "How was yours?" Nathan smiled. "Interesting. Business stuff?" "Not exactly." Oliver looked curious. Nathan glanced at him briefly before returning his eyes to the road. "I spent the day talking to people." Oliver grinned. "You make that sound unusual." Nathan laughed. "Maybe it is." As they drove home, Oliver began describing a class assignment. Students had been asked to write about someone they admired. Most chose athletes, actors, or historical figures. "Who did you choose?" Nathan asked. Oliver looked out the window for a moment. "I have not decided yet." "You still have time." The boy nodded. Then he asked a question that caught Nathan completely off guard. "Do you think Claire is happy?" Nathan tightened his hands around the steering wheel. "Why are you asking?" "Because she is nice all the time." Oliver shrugged. "Sometimes people are nice because they are happy. Sometimes people are nice because they know what it feels like when somebody is not." The words settled heavily in the quiet car. Nathan had never considered that possibility. He had spent days observing Claire, yet he knew almost nothing about her life, nothing about her struggles, nothing about what had shaped her into the person she had become. Later that night, after Oliver went upstairs, Nathan found himself sitting alone in the living room. The house was silent except for the ticking of an antique clock near the fireplace. He opened his laptop and stared at the screen. 1,000 business reports sat waiting for his attention. Instead, his thoughts drifted toward a small restaurant 40 miles away, toward a waitress who seemed to leave every person slightly better than she found them. And for the first time, Nathan realized he was no longer trying to understand what Claire had done. He was trying to understand why she did it. 2 days later, Nathan finally did something he normally avoided. He asked a personal question. The lunch crowd at Willow Creek Grill had thinned. Sunlight streamed through the front windows, casting long rectangles of gold across the wooden floor. Claire was wiping down a table near the back when Nathan approached with a fresh cup of coffee in his hand. She looked up and smiled politely. By now, his visits no longer surprised her. "You are becoming a regular," she said. Nathan glanced around the restaurant. "Apparently." Claire laughed softly. "Most people come here for the pie. I am beginning to suspect that is not entirely true." Something amused flickered in her eyes. "Then what do they come for?" Nathan looked around the room. An elderly couple shared a slice of apple pie near the window. A construction worker sat alone with a sandwich and a newspaper. 2 nurses in blue scrubs chatted quietly over coffee. "Maybe they come because somebody remembers their names." Claire paused. Then she continued wiping the table. "Names matter." "Why?" Nathan asked. "Because people matter." The answer arrived so quickly it sounded effortless. Nathan leaned against the booth beside him. "You make it sound simple." Claire folded the cleaning cloth and looked toward the front door. "Most important things are simple." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The restaurant settled into a comfortable quiet. Then Nathan asked the question that had been sitting in the back of his mind for days. "Why are you like this?" Claire blinked. "Like what?" "Patient. Kind. Consistent." Nathan searched for the right words. "Most people have bad days." Claire smiled slightly. "I have bad days." "You hide them well." For the first time since they met, something thoughtful crossed her face. Not sadness. Not discomfort. Reflection. "When I was 16, she said quietly, my mother worked 2 jobs. Nathan listened. One winter she got sick. Really sick. Nothing life-threatening. Just enough that she could not work for several weeks. Claire glanced toward the coffee machine humming softly in the corner. Bills piled up. Stress piled up. Everything felt heavy. Nathan remained silent. One afternoon, a woman we barely knew knocked on our door. Claire smiled at the memory. She brought groceries. A casserole. A handwritten note. Nathan immediately thought of Margaret. Of the folded paper. Of the tears. What did the note say? Claire laughed softly. Nothing extraordinary. She looked out the window. It said, "You are not carrying this alone." Nathan felt something shift inside him. "And that stayed with you?" Claire nodded. "More than the groceries." The restaurant door opened, letting in a gust of cool autumn air. Customers entered. Conversations resumed. Life moved forward. Yet Nathan stood perfectly still. Because for the first time, he was beginning to see the pattern. Every small kindness Claire offered. Every name she remembered. Every note she wrote. None of it was random. Years ago, someone had helped her feel seen during one of the hardest moments of her life. And ever since then, she had quietly spent her days doing the same for everyone else. That conversation stayed with Nathan far longer than he expected. The next few days passed in a blur of meetings, presentations, and conference calls, yet Claire's story kept resurfacing in quiet moments. A handwritten note, a simple meal, a stranger who showed up when life felt overwhelming. None of it sounded extraordinary, yet somehow it had changed the direction of an entire life. Late Thursday afternoon, Nathan found himself reviewing applications for the company's annual community grant program. Normally, a committee handled the process and forwarded recommendations for approval. This year, for reasons he could not fully explain, he decided to read them himself. Hundreds of requests filled the screen. Local schools, youth programs, family shelters, community centers. For years, Nathan had evaluated these applications the same way he evaluated business proposals. Impact metrics, budget efficiency, projected outcomes. This time, something felt different. He began reading the personal stories attached to the applications. A teacher trying to build a reading program for struggling students. A retired veteran organizing weekly meals for lonely seniors. A small nonprofit helping families through temporary hardships. The numbers suddenly seemed less important than the people behind them. Around 6 o'clock, his assistant stepped into the office. "You are still here?" she asked. Nathan glanced at the darkening skyline outside his window. "Apparently." She smiled. "Most of the building left an hour ago." Nathan looked around. The executive floor was nearly empty. Desks sat dark and silent. "Thank you, Melissa." She paused near the door. "For what?" For everything you do. Melissa blinked. For a moment, she seemed unsure whether he was joking. Then she smiled warmly. You are welcome. After she left, Nathan sat quietly for several seconds. He could not remember the last time he had thanked her directly. Yet she had helped manage impossible schedules, difficult clients, and endless crises for almost 7 years. Somehow he had taken that reliability for granted. The realization stung. That evening, Oliver was waiting in the living room with a school assignment spread across the coffee table. Colored markers, photographs, and handwritten notes covered several sheets of poster board. What are you working on? Nathan asked. The Person I Admire project. Nathan sat beside him. Did you decide? Oliver nodded. Yes. He turned the board around. At the center was a photograph Oliver had printed from the restaurant's website. Claire stood beside the front counter, smiling at the camera. Nathan stared at the picture. You picked Claire? Oliver nodded confidently. She helps people. You barely know her. Oliver thought about that. Maybe. But everybody seems happier after talking to her. Nathan looked down at the project. Under the photograph, Oliver had written a single sentence in careful handwriting. Real success is making other people feel important. Nathan read the words twice. Then a third time. The room grew very quiet. Because deep down, he knew his son had discovered something that had taken him more than 40 years to begin understanding. And for the first time, Nathan wondered whether the most valuable lessons in life were often taught by people the world overlooked. Nathan could not stop thinking about Oliver's project. The poster board remained propped against the wall of the living room long after his son had gone to bed. Every time Nathan walked past it, his eyes drifted back to the same sentence. Real success is making other people feel important. It sounded like something an experienced leader might spend decades learning. Yet a 10-year-old had written it with a blue marker in less than a minute. The following afternoon, Nathan left the office earlier than usual. Not because he had finished his work. There was always more work. More meetings. More decisions. More numbers waiting to be analyzed. But lately, another kind of question had begun demanding his attention. He arrived at Willow Creek Grill just before the dinner rush. The parking lot was nearly full. Inside, the familiar warmth greeted him immediately. The smell of coffee. The hum of conversations. The gentle rhythm of a place where people came not only to eat but to feel comfortable. Claire was carrying a tray toward a booth when she spotted him. You have excellent timing, she said with a smile. We just made a fresh apple pie. Nathan laughed. People keep telling me that. They are not wrong. A few minutes later, he sat at his usual booth near the window. Outside, orange leaves drifted across the sidewalk. Inside, the restaurant glowed with soft evening light. As Claire moved through the room, Nathan noticed something he had somehow missed before. People were constantly stopping her. Not because there were problems, because they wanted to talk to her. A retired teacher asked about her mother's health. A young couple introduced her to their newborn daughter. A regular customer handed her a photograph of his grandson's graduation. Claire remembered details from every conversation. Not perfectly, not mechanically, naturally, as though she genuinely cared. Nathan found himself wondering how many relationships he had allowed to become transactional over the years. How many conversations he had rushed through. How many people he had reduced to roles instead of seeing them as individuals. His thoughts were interrupted when Margaret approached his table carrying a coffee pot. Need a refill? She asked. Nathan smiled. Please. She poured carefully. Her hands moved a little slower than they had during his first visit. Yet there was a lightness in her expression he had not noticed before. You seem happy today, Nathan said. Margaret chuckled. I am. Good week. A very good week. She glanced toward Claire, who was helping a family near the front entrance. That young woman has a way of reminding people what matters. Nathan followed her gaze. She certainly seems to. Margaret smiled knowingly. You know, most people think kindness changes the person receiving it. Nathan listened. But sometimes it changes the person watching. The words settled over him like a quiet truth. Across the room, Claire laughed at something a customer said. Nearby, Oliver's sentence echoed once again in Nathan's mind. Real success is making other people feel important. And sitting there with a cooling cup of coffee between his hands, Nathan began to realize that the lesson he thought he was observing from a distance had already started changing him. The transformation became impossible to ignore. Over the following week, employees throughout Blackwell Technologies noticed small changes in Nathan. He stayed after meetings to ask questions that had nothing to do with profits. He learned the names of people he had passed for years without truly seeing. He began writing handwritten thank you notes after major projects instead of sending automated emails. None of it was dramatic. None of it appeared in company press releases. Yet the atmosphere slowly shifted. One Friday afternoon, Nathan walked through the headquarters carrying a folder when he noticed a group gathered near the reception desk. Laughter echoed through the lobby. Curious, he stopped. Melissa, his assistant, was celebrating her 15th anniversary with the company. A simple cake sat on a table. Balloons floated near the windows. Employees from different departments had gathered to congratulate her. Nathan watched quietly from a distance. Then he noticed something unexpected. Melissa was crying. Not from sadness. From gratitude. One employee after another shared stories about how she had helped them through difficult days, impossible deadlines, and personal challenges. They remembered her kindness, her patience, her encouragement. Standing there, Nathan felt a familiar realization settle over him. Nobody was talking about Melissa's title. Nobody mentioned her salary. Nobody praised her for increasing quarterly revenue. They were talking about how she made people feel. That evening, he drove to Willow Creek Grill with Oliver. The restaurant was busy as usual. Warm light spilled across crowded tables. Claire moved through the room carrying plates and greeting customers by name. When she noticed Oliver, her face brightened immediately. "How is the project?" she asked. Oliver grinned. "I got an A." Claire placed a hand over her heart. "That is wonderful. My teacher liked it." Claire smiled. "I am glad." Nathan watched the exchange quietly. Then Oliver reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "This is for you." Claire looked surprised. "For me?" Oliver nodded. She opened it carefully. Inside was a handwritten note. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. Then she smiled. A genuine smile that seemed to light the entire room. "Thank you," she said softly. Nathan noticed something familiar about the moment. A handwritten note. A few simple words. No money. No grand gesture. Yet it clearly mattered. As they drove home later that night, Oliver stared out the window while city lights passed by. "Dad." "Yes." "Do you know what I wrote?" Nathan smiled. "No." Oliver looked back at him. "I wrote thank you for helping people feel important." Nathan felt a lump rise unexpectedly in his throat. The same lesson. The same truth. Passed from one person to another. A stranger helping a family years ago. Claire helping countless people afterward. Claire influencing Oliver. Oliver changing his father. Nathan glanced at his son and then back at the road ahead. For years he had believed success moved upward through wealth, status, and achievement. Now he was beginning to understand that the most meaningful things moved differently. Quietly. Person to person. Heart to heart. And somehow, they traveled farther than money ever could. Winter arrived quietly. The trees around Boston stood bare against pale gray skies, and the air carried the sharp bite of approaching snow. Nearly 2 months had passed since Nathan first walked into Willow Creek Grill and laughed at something he did not understand. Now, as he sat alone in his office overlooking the city, he found himself staring at a different kind of report. It was not a financial statement, not a market forecast. It was a list of employee feedback collected anonymously throughout Blackwell Technologies. For years, Nathan had skimmed these reports. This time he read every word. Again and again, one theme appeared. People wanted to feel valued. They wanted to feel heard. They wanted to know their efforts mattered. Nathan leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. The answers had been in front of him the entire time. Not hidden in spreadsheets. Not buried in data. Hidden in ordinary people. A few days later, the company hosted its annual holiday gathering. Hundreds of employees filled a large ballroom decorated with white lights and evergreen garlands. Traditionally, Nathan opened the event with a presentation celebrating company growth, revenue numbers, expansion plans, future goals. This year, he walked onto the stage carrying only a small stack of handwritten cards. The room grew quiet. Nathan looked across the crowd. Engineers, receptionists, managers, custodians, interns, people from every corner of the company. For a long time, he began, I thought leadership meant having answers. The audience listened carefully. Lately, I have learned that leadership begins with paying attention. A few surprised smiles appeared throughout the room. Nathan continued, this company exists because of people who show up every day and make a difference, often without recognition. Then he began reading names. One by one. Employees who had helped coworkers, solved problems, supported teammates, encouraged others during difficult moments. No bonuses were announced. No promotions were revealed. Just sincere appreciation. Yet as the evening continued, something remarkable happened. People stood, applauded, smiled through tears. Not because they were receiving money, because they felt seen. Later that night, Nathan drove to Willow Creek Grill one more time. Snowflakes drifted slowly beneath the streetlights. Inside, the restaurant glowed with familiar warmth. Claire was arranging holiday decorations near the front counter when she noticed him. "You look happy," she said. Nathan laughed softly. "That is probably your fault." Claire tilted her head. "My fault? You started something." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Nathan reached into his coat pocket and handed her a folded note. Claire opened it carefully. Her eyes moved across the page. A small smile appeared. "Thank you," she said quietly. Nathan nodded. "No, thank you." Around them, customers talked and laughed. Coffee steamed from fresh mugs. Snow continued falling outside. The world looked exactly the same as it always had. Yet Nathan knew something fundamental had changed. Not in the restaurant. Not in the city. In himself. Because somewhere between a $5 tip, a handwritten note, and a question from a 10-year-old boy, he had finally begun learning what success was really worth. The first snow of the season arrived a week before Christmas. Soft flakes drifted across the streets of Boston, settling on rooftops, sidewalks, and the bare branches that lined the city. Inside Willow Creek Grill, holiday lights glowed along the windows, casting warm reflections across the familiar wooden tables. It was the kind of evening that made people linger a little longer over coffee and conversation. Nathan sat at his usual booth with Oliver across from him. Neither of them spoke for a moment. They simply watched the restaurant move around them. Margaret laughed with a customer near the register. Families shared meals. Friends exchanged gifts. And Claire moved through it all with the same steady kindness that had changed more lives than she probably realized. Oliver finally broke the silence. "Dad." Nathan looked up. "Yeah." The boy smiled. "You seem different now." Nathan glanced toward the window where snowflakes drifted beneath the streetlights. "I think I am." Oliver nodded as if he had already known the answer. Across the room, Claire approached their table carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. "On the house," she said. Nathan laughed. "You really need to stop doing that." "I know," she replied with a smile. "I never listen." They shared a quiet laugh. Then Nathan reached into his coat pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. Claire looked puzzled. "What is this?" "Just open it later." She studied him for a second before nodding. "All right." There was no dramatic announcement. No oversized check. No grand speech. Just a simple note. Inside, Nathan had written something he once would have considered insignificant. "Thank you for reminding me that people are not numbers. Thank you for teaching my son something I should have learned years ago. Thank you for showing me what success looks like when nobody is keeping score." Later that evening, after Nathan and Oliver left, Claire stood alone near the counter and opened the envelope. She read the note once. Then again, a soft smile touched her face. Not because of recognition. Not because of praise. But because she understood something important. Kindness had completed another circle. Years ago, a stranger had helped her family through a difficult season. She had spent years passing that gift forward without expecting anything in return. And now, somewhere along the way, it had reached a father and a son who would carry it forward too. Outside, snow continued falling across the quiet town. Inside, the lights of the restaurant glowed warmly against the winter night. Nathan had arrived believing wealth measured a person's value. He left understanding that the most meaningful legacy is not what we leave behind in accounts, buildings, or titles. It is what we leave behind in people. Sometimes the smallest acts create the longest echoes. And sometimes the people the world overlooks are the very ones who teach us how to see. If this story reminded you of someone whose kindness changed your life, perhaps this is a good moment to think of them. Share their story in the comments, or join us for another journey like this one. Because the quiet ones are never truly ordinary.